what are some of the fundamental things you need to have in a business so that it can build to scale?
It's important that the founder has the vision. You must see yourself as the next Google, even when you're a startup. You must see yourself there when you've actually got nothing. Because that vision is where your North Star is, right? And some of the times when we scale, the problem is that you've still got the Golf 1 mindset, yet you're already in the M3. If you're growing too quickly, is your operation efficiency also growing at the same rate?
Today, I am joined by none other but Mr. Mokgatle.
That's correct.
Is that correct? All right, I love it. And he leads the Entrepreneurial Business Portfolio at BDO South Africa. He's also a psycher, top 35 under 35. And he's a founder of his own enterprise in his own right. And they want to have a conversation about entrepreneurial businesses. And I think the importance not only of that landscape in the country, but how can entrepreneurs build for scale, right? And I think there's no better person to have this conversation with but Mr. Mokgatle. Good, sir. How are you?
I'm good, and yourself. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm brilliant, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to have the conversation. I know you are absolutely incredibly busy. But I think this is an important conversation. Maybe let's start right there. Why we see case studies all around the world. There's case studies in India, case studies in Egypt, around the importance of a dynamic SME landscape. In your views, in your eyes, especially from an emerging economy perspective, how important is that space?
It's absolutely paramount. And I think the issue is that we almost use it as buzzwords, but we don't actually implement.
Sure.
So a lot of the times everyone says, oh, we need to scale it. We need SMEs. SMEs are the future.
Sure.
But are we actually investing in SMEs? That's a different question, right? We need to get to a point where we say, okay, well, is the environment correct for an SME to scale and actually thrive? So you go to Silicon Valley. For Silicon Valley to be Silicon Valley that it is today, there was investment that went into it. It was known as the hub to actually foster and enhance the economy through it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think as a South African country, we're still quite young in that space. You look at cities like Cape Town, where you can see there's a thriving popularity of entrepreneurship, of VCs, of private equity, where you can see there's an investment in it. There's more fintechs coming out of Cape. There's actually, the environment has to be right.
Yeah.
If you take a seed and you put it on this ground right now, it's not going to grow. But you put it in the soil, you nurture it, you give it sunlight, you give it water, it'll come up. So that's important. The environment has to be right for you to actually go forth with that SME mindset or build SMEs.
For those businesses to thrive. So let's talk about maybe the environment, right? From a South African perspective, and maybe we can even look at Africa. I love that you talked about Silicon Valley because that's sort of the quintessential case study, right? So let's look at that again, I guess, and then juxtapose it to the SA, South African context. What do you think are some of the key pieces that are missing to ensure that we do have a conducive environment for small and medium enterprises to actually thrive and grow?
You look at it and it's actually one sentence, or pretty much one thing. In Silicon Valley, they buy into your vision. And they're not necessarily buying into a business that's already running. So you look at it, Y Combinator that actually funded Airbnb, they were buying into a vision.
Sure.
They were not buying into a balance sheet. They were not buying into assets. They were buying into something that did not exist. So show me in South Africa, how many companies will buy into a dream? If you could show me, then we could start there. Because remember, when you're buying into a dream, you're buying into something that no one can see. So it's actually quite scary. You know, you're thinking, what if I'm throwing money down the drain here? You look at the burn rate that, for example, OpenAI had. They nearly shut down because they were burning money so much. And will this product ever get to market? Will we ever make money? So you compare that to what we have here. Here, your business must be running. People want to buy into something that's already on the move. You know, if you're not moving and you're standing still and you've got an idea, unfortunately, it's very difficult for someone to come in and buy into a business that hasn't started.
I love that so much. first, I love just to highlight that phrase, people buy into your vision, which is critical. But then I like when you're talking about the ability to finance something or fund something that's not even operational, that now becomes a capital conversation. And then we need to talk about the finance landscape.
Yeah.
And I asked the question, I presume I already know what you're going to say around the question. Do you think that the finance landscape in South Africa, call it early startup funding, venture capital funding, do you think PE, private equity, do you think it's deep enough? And what advice would you give to people in that space if we are to say we need to change the thinking so that we can accommodate the context of businesses that are in this country and in Africa or emerging economies like South Africa?
I don't think it's deep enough. But also on the other end, I get a fund and I must run a business. At the end of the day, I've got investors. They've got a specific threshold. They've got a specific patience capital, and they will expect certain returns.
Yeah.
So that's where it gets quite tricky. You look at it from an overseas market, it's wealthy families, it's family-owned businesses. So they're not necessarily looking at getting a return in 5 years. They don't mind waiting 15, 20 years to get their return. So you have to also look at it from that perspective. From a shareholder perspective, what's your patience in terms of capital? How long are you willing to wait for it to actually thrive? What's the mandate? So until we've got someone who comes in with a mandate that says, well, look, I actually want to create 5 unicorns in South Africa, from startup all the way to becoming global conglomerates, and I've got the patience capital. Then it will change the landscape, because then you change how we actually do business. You then create business that's completely different. You then create the Google of Africa.
Yeah.
So it gets quite tricky, because the mindset behind the VCs is saying, well, what is my horizon here? And typically it's a very short horizon. I want to get in, run, get my proper numbers, get my dividend, and exit. So if the mindset is we want to create X amount of businesses that will be around in generations to come, that's a different conversation, completely different conversation.
Sure. I like that, Pat. You spoke about the Google of Africa. You spoke about the next unicorn. These are ideas that we haven't per se seen from a South African perspective, but also just in the context of Africa. We've seen a lot of startups doing really amazing things. Nigeria, the fintech space is booming. I mean, I always love talking about the fintech environment in Nigeria, Kenya. A lot happening there. These are sort of the typical case studies, right? What are some of and when we talk about that, we're talking about businesses that it's not small mom and pop shops, but it's guys who are saying we're going to start small, but the goal is to become the next big conglomerate, behemoth, whatever the case might be. So then we're talking about scalable businesses. In your view, what are some of the fundamental things you need to have in a business so that it can build to scale?
It's important that the founder has the vision. You must see yourself as the next Google, even when you're a startup. You must see yourself there when you've actually got nothing. Because that vision is where your North Star is, right?
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. You start off, you're going to Cape Town.
Sure.
And when you start off, you're driving a City Golf, that Golf 1 with that hard clutch, that you actually, you get a pop-up with your calf muscle is proper after
That's
that,
from
right?
working on
just
that,
from on the clutch. And the steering wheel, your biceps are proper.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, that Golf 1 will overheat. That's just the nature of it. At a certain point, you'll need a car that has got more muscle. You'll need a car that can actually take you further. You'll need a car that is quicker. But you can't move from a Golf 1 into a BMW M3 that's got more power, that moves from 0 to 100 in about 4.2 seconds, 3.9 seconds. Can you handle that? And some of the times when we scale, the problem is that you've still got the Golf 1 mindset, yet you're already in the M3. Have you got the mechanics that can work on an M3 now? Have you got the driving skill of driving an M3? Just because you're the founder does not mean necessarily that you need to be the one that's actually running the day-to-day.
Sure.
So what it speaks to the key fundamentals of saying, yes, I'm a Golf 1, but point is I need to get to Cape Town. Some can say, well, let's fly to Cape Town. Some can say, well, let's drive, let's take a bus. But how do you move from being a Golf 1 and being in an M3 to Cape Town? Sometimes you need to bring in different people. Sometimes you actually need to realize that it's important to work with different individuals that will bring different skill sets, individuals that will bring, for example, a CFO to come and look at just the numbers, to drive that strategic numbers game for you. Bring in a chief marketing officer, bring in a proper HR. Those things seem like you're actually spending money, but it's actually investments into your business.
I like that.
Because you can't do it all. Your engine of this Golf 1 is not good enough to get you there.
And I'm guessing you find that a lot in your space. Pat, you're leading the entrepreneurial business portfolio at BDO. You work, and I know this from conversations with you. You like to say, I don't advise these businesses, but we partner with them. So I'm guessing you find these sort of issues a lot. How do you advise them around those conversations when it comes to scaling?
It's important to, always have that conversation around you and I as running a business together here. I'm coming in from an entrepreneurial perspective. Yes, I'm bringing in the accounting and the cloud, and I'm in the back end. However, actually, I need to look at, is your working capital good enough? Are we paying suppliers too quickly? Why are we not taking 60 days to pay them? But yet we receive our money from our suppliers, from our debtors quite later. So it affects my liquidity. So we have those conversations just starting around, let's look at the business, because as people say, the numbers don't lie.
Yep.
They'll actually show you the real truth.
Yep.
Once you start uncovering them, but having a conversation, say, but hold on here. Let's go speak to our suppliers. Let's get credit terms with them. Let's make sure that we're actually running a business that is liquid. A lot of the times people talk about cash is king, and cash is definitely king because you need your business to be cash flush. You need to be able to maneuver.
Yeah.
Because when the dip happens, for example, when COVID happened, the businesses that did well are the businesses that had cash.
Yeah.
That was sitting on cash and saying, well, if Swiss is selling, it's in line with what we're doing. Guess what? We're going to get it at a bargain because you've got the money. We're liquid. So how do we get a business in a position to be able to have enough free cash flow, to utilize it well, to make sure that they can actually, even when the times are tough, they can still run a business.
Sure.
So the partnering comes from, yes, we bring in the financial element, but we then look at it holistically. How are we doing actuals to budget? Are we actually on track? Will we make budget? Why are we not on track? So having those conversations to say, let us hold you accountable as the business owner. Because a lot of the times, founders, business owner, family-owned businesses, we get emotional in it.
Yeah.
And those emotions kind of cloud us when we have to make certain decisions because it's my business. I started it. So we come in as a sounding board.
I want to have a conversation, Pat, around the different types of financing instruments or options that are available typically to entrepreneurs. And then if we can just maybe break that down and then also have a conversation around, because we know that there is, let's call it, certain type of capital for certain business needs. So attracting or acquiring the right capital that actually speaks to the problem or the challenge that you're having as an entrepreneur. So can we address those two, starting with what does the array of different financial instruments or funding options available to entrepreneurs typically look like?
Yep.
And then how do we ensure that we're getting the right type of funding for the right type of business problem or challenge?
Look, there's an array, right? As you rightly said, you can start at private equity, venture capitalists. There's a specific mandate. They know they're going to exit. They want a specific EBITDA. And for entrepreneurs, if you don't know what EBITDA is, leave private equity. Let that go. Because they're going to ask you some very difficult questions about your business because they want certain returns at a certain point in time. Then you've got your banks. Everyone talks about the banks, the traditional banks. And the banks also have credit in the back end.
Sure.
And the credit team will also ask some heavy questions. They'll also want some collateral. They want to know, if I'm funding this business and tomorrow it doesn't work out, what do I have? What can I actually go in and say, okay, I'm going to take this and sell it and, recoup my money. So it is difficult to get funding from the banks, but the banks are, quite open to playing. The banks are quite open to seeing what can we do to scale your business? How do we help you? Then what's come onto the South African market, which is quite exciting, is the PO funding, short-term funders, working capital funding.
Yes.
Where the guys are actually saying, okay, Sfiso, you have got transactions on a monthly basis. And we go to this free cash flow. However, the guys are paying you in 45 days. So you don't have money. You're not liquid. But we see you've got a few guys that owe you money, some good debtors. So we will actually fund you, in inverted commas, off the back of those, call it debtors, right?
Yeah.
So they basically, you're almost seeding your book, and then when you get paid, you pay them back.
Lovely.
Theirs is quite different. The interest is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
However, it gives you that free cash flow. Typically, they end up at about 5 million in terms of the, call it threshold, where a bank you can go, I mean, as high as you want, depending on obviously the collateral, depending on the risk appetite. Private equity as well, they would come in and say, okay, well, we want to look at the equity structure. We want to take something. We want to sit on your board.
Yeah.
It really, really depends. It also varies on what are you looking for. And once you actually say, okay, well, maybe I just need working capital.
Sure.
I just need 5 million to just keep the business afloat. I pay it back. There's a specific rate that I pay it back at. That also works. But they're also adding loans. So within that, these short-term funders, these fintechs are actually adding within it loans and overdrafts to help an entrepreneur as they propel, right?
Lovely.
However, as I rightly said, you also have to make sure that the business has got cash flows. The business needs to be operating.
Okay.
And if the business isn't, it's very difficult for them to as well, give you that kind of money to come in. And then the last one is the government. You've got, departments within the government that are specifically looking at how do we scale businesses. You talk of the IDC, you talk of the likes of a CIFA, a CEDA, NEF. Those are looking at how do we fund you, how do we help you grow. But typically as well, they will also be looking at what does the business have? Do you have contracts in place? So they will not just willy-nilly going to just give you funding as well. They will also look at, however, they're not like a bank in terms of their strictness, in terms of looking at your business to a point where you say, do you have collateral? If you've got, for example, right contracts in place, you can prove that you'll get the revenue in. You'll probably get, and also the payment holidays. Kind of, nice payment holidays over time to see actually how do we fund you and how do we get your business going. But it's important to actually look at it as a business owner and say, well, what do I need the money for? Because a lot of the times we say we need money, but what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Is your business ready for actually getting a bigger space? Is capacity at that point? Because if you don't have the capacity at that point, why are you getting a bigger space? Because you're just now incurring a bigger cost. So you have to look at it holistically. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, you don't have that skill set. It goes back to what I was saying. You don't have the skill set to handle an M3. So you need to bring in a driver to drive this. To say, well, actually, hold on here. The space doesn't meet our demand. We need, operationally, we've got too many things happening. We need to bring in a bigger space. It also increases your insurance because a bigger space, more product, insurance. Should we maybe have a just-in-time system? So all of those things are important if you've got the right people to actually analyze and say, well, we do need an extra 15 million, but the 15 million will be used 1, 2, 3, 4. How am I actually going to utilize it once it's in? And how am I going to pay it back? Because a lot of the times people look at the money coming in. But that is actually a liability. You're sitting with a liability on your balance sheet that you need to actually settle. What is the plan around that? What's the payment plan around you getting this, utilizing it? Because once that money comes in, it hits your bank, so you've got the asset, but you also have the liability. So once that asset hits your books, what are you doing with it to generate enough so that you can actually,
And so we talk about, just on that, we talk about good debt versus bad debt, right? In that instance, that would be good debt. You're leveraging this money to grow your business. But is there a plan, like you said, to ensure that you can actually pay back that debt? And if that plan is there, then perfect, you're good to go. But I love, you said two things that I like. One, finance readiness. Ensure that you're actually ready for the capital that you're looking for. I'm guessing, and please add on to this, you're looking at governance systems, you're looking at people, your processes, you're looking at, is there anything else that
you're looking at management accounts? You're looking at your taxes being in place.
Love it.
So you want funding, for example, from the government, but yet your VAT is outstanding. You're not going to get that funding. You're looking for funding, but yet your Your income tax is not paid. Your UIF is not paid. So all those things are important because your structures in terms of you being compliant tell a story. As a funder, I don't know you. I walk in and I say, can I see your set of financials? Your financials are not audited. Can I trust those numbers? I don't know you from a bar of soap. So I need to look at it, look at the stamp of authority from the auditor, which is a signature saying, yes, those financials are correct. And those financials you can rely on. Because I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to model around those financials.
Based on those numbers.
Because that's my historic.
Yeah.
And then looking at the future, present value to get what is this business worth?
Actually worth.
Right. So when I make that investment decision, I'm basing it on a set of financials. If you don't have financials, your taxes are not paid, there's no compliance structures, there's no governance in the business. Is my money safe?
And a lot of times, especially at the small business stage or early startup stage, these are often the things that entrepreneurs overlook. The governance, you find entrepreneurs using the business bank account for personal expenses and not separating the two. Pat is laughing because he knows exactly what we're talking about. And so it's critical to have those things in place. The other thing that you touched on was growth, right? But here's a question around growth, because there's something that we call sustainable growth rate, right? Entrepreneurs, and especially now when we're looking in from a South African context or an African context, we just want to see that growth coming. But how can we ensure that we are growing? So call it ensuring that your finance strategy is aligned with your growth strategy. How can we ensure that we are growing at a sustainable rate that we can actually maintain and manage this growth?
Growth is scary and also exciting at the same time. If you're growing too quickly, is your operation efficiencies also growing at the same rate? And I'll repeat that. If you're growing too quickly, is your operational efficiencies also matching that growth? Because if it's not, and I'll give you an example.
Please do.
I run a business and I've got 2 vans and I do deliveries. And then all of a sudden, I've got 15 trucks. Have I actually managed my tracking system? Do I have a proper tracking system? Do I know the telematics? Do I know the parts? Do I know the routes? Am I ready for the insurance for 15 trucks versus 2 vans? If I miss the schedule, what happens? Am I ready for the covers that I need to have in terms of, covering myself in terms of personal liability? Do I have all that in place? Have I built a team that's going to support my drivers? Have I done training modules for these drivers? I had 2 drivers. I have 15.
Sure.
So yes, it's great. I've just got in. I'm on Instagram. I've posted I've bought 15 trucks. But do I have the team to support the 15 trucks? Do I have the working capital to support the diesel for 15 trucks? So a lot of the times we get excited to say, let me grow quickly. But after you grow quickly, what happens then?
Sure.
Is the structure in place for you to support that growth? It's very important that when you grow in a way that you are actually not growing because you're seeing other people growing or you want to chase a specific growth because other people are growing. Grow as in I say stay in your lane.
Yeah.
If someone passes you driving at 300, remember, you were just driving a Golf 1 the other day. You're in M3 right now. You're fine. You're okay. That is your path. Stick to your path. Yes, you can aspire.
Yeah.
You can aspire to be in that W16 Bugatti, in that fast lane.
Yeah.
But there's a handling of that Bugatti.
Yeah.
Be ready to handle it.
And
build to handle it.
And maybe one day you can get there.
Correct.
But take your time. It's your individualistic journey to get there.
And I think maybe just to hop in there and interject, I think what tends to happen is we tend to look at other businesses.
Yeah.
And we say, I want to be like that business. Yeah. But we don't go into the fundamentals of how that business came about. We don't go into the heartache, the pain, the sleepless nights, because a lot of the times also entrepreneurs share the good sides. They share once they've made
all the time.
We've never had an entrepreneur come and say, I'm running a business and I'm struggling.
Yeah.
I'm struggling.
Sure.
It is difficult. I don't know whether I'm going to make rent. I don't know what I'm going to do next. We always hear it on the other end.
Yeah.
So typically what's sold is, the great side, but no one actually goes into the heartache. A lot of the times we have conversations with entrepreneurs once they've passed that stage.
Oh.
It would be interesting to have a conversation with an entrepreneur that's actually going
in
through
that
it.
stage.
That's in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
Because then you'll get the real facts. And typically you forget. I mean, once you've passed the storm, you forget, and you speak about it
as if it wasn't a storm.
You make it like light rain, but it was a storm.
Yeah.
It was insane.
Sure.
You didn't know whether you were coming or going. And a lot of times that's how entrepreneurs are feeling. Hence, it's a lonely space.
Yeah.
Because you only speak when you're on the other side of the horizon and say, well, it was tough. But that toughness is not really what you make it out to be, because you're out. Once you're in it, is a different ball game.
Sure. I love the conversation about the entrepreneur on an individual level. Call it the entrepreneur, the founder behind that business that's supposed to be built for scale. And that's what we're talking about now. On one hand, it's a leadership conversation. And because we were talking, your first point was you need to have people buy into your vision. So you need to have a vision of where it is that we are now, but where is it that we're trying to go, right? And then the leader devises or sets the tone or speaks life into that vision. But then you also spoke about team, people. Do you have the right team when you're talking about operational efficiency? Do you have the right? The leader is going to build out that team.
Correct.
Then when we talk about team, we're talking about culture. The leader must set the tone of what do we want the culture of this organization to look like? What are some other critical leadership, call it capabilities or competencies that you think entrepreneurs need to have if they're going to be successful in building businesses for scale?
You need to be a human. You need to be a human. You're not Steve Jobs. You're not Elon Musk. You're a human first. Once you understand that you're dealing with people and people are at the center of your business, without you being human, you're not going to run a business. Because a lot of the times people make it about them.
Sure.
It's not about you. It's about being a team player. As much as you founded the business, you're also a team member. And a lot of times we tend to go into this overdrive. This is my business. I started it. I know it. I run it better than anyone. Without that team, you're a sole trader. Without the people supporting you, without your support structure, right from the security guard all the way to the cleaner, they are fundamental in your business. They must live the values of that company. They must speak with pride about that company. The culture you set must be known from the door all the way up to the CEO.
Yeah.
It's so important, because if I walk into an entity and the receptionist is not happy and the receptionist is disgruntled, it tells me a story about that organization. So it's important that a culture breathes from the top all the way down and across all verticals. And a lot of the times we see it where entrepreneurs think, this is my business, my baby. I'm the one that gets paid last. And I hear that quite a lot. Yes, you get paid last because you're the founder.
Yeah.
But typically, you should look at it and say, well, that's the path you chose. Entrepreneurship is very difficult.
Yeah.
For entities to sit and be listed on the JSE is difficult. It's not easy.
Sure.
And there's expectations around you as the founder. You are the head of this specific organization. But remember, there's people who actually are helping you on this journey.
Yeah.
And as you rightly said, you have to drive the vision, drive the culture. But if you are not human, I can tell you for a fact, you're going to lose people.
I think that's an incredibly powerful point. Humanity. In academic literature, business, entrepreneurial literature, there's now a term, or rather leadership literature, there's now a term. We know about transformational leadership, charismatic leadership. There's now, and servant leadership, there's now a term which I came across, which I think is so interesting. And from a South African perspective, is beautiful. And they call it Ubuntu leadership. Which is, I am because you are. And that means we are,
Yeah.
right? But that's humanity. Ubuntu speaks to humanity. So be a person. And that's become such an important thing now that from an academic perspective, academics now writing about this.
Jeez.
From a South African perspective, they're saying we need to write about this concept of Ubuntu leadership, which borrows from servant leadership and all these other constructs of leadership. But before we go down a segue or a rabbit hole of leadership, let's talk about we know the power of technology. We call it digitization, automation, data and analytics. All of these things are critical. Digital transformation.
Yeah.
And now we're talking more and more about, you spoke about OpenAI, ChatGPT, generative AI.
Yeah.
You do a lot of work leading entrepreneurial business around cloud and cloud services. What's the role of technology in building a business for scale, and how important is it? And what are some of the technologies that entrepreneurs can be thinking about leveraging to successfully not only unlock operational efficiencies, but ultimately unlock value?
Look, I mean, for example, we work in the cloud. Everything that we do, give it 30 years ago, you were doing probably journals on a ledger. You were writing it out in pencil, scratching it out. I can tell you right now what a certain business is sitting in terms of their balance sheet, their income statement, live data. So I can give you live accounting, which is completely different. You know, you walk into a meeting and you meet someone and say, well, what are your numbers sitting? You can just glance in and you'll give them exact numbers as of today, not historical. As of today, this is where I'm sitting. Why? Because there's an integration. So we use Xero, which integrates into the banks. So for example, Swiss runs a business. As you transact in your bank, there's an API. It pulls through into Xero and it already says 5,000 Rand has been spent. This is the difference. Which account should it be allocated to? And it already starts matching it. So what happens is that if I click go in and the team clicks and puts it into the right space, your income statement is updated, your cash flow is updated, your balance sheet is updated, you've got numbers as of today. You have a receipt, you just take a picture of it, it goes into what's called Dext. Dext already pre-populates it, it goes into our Xero system. So all of that now versus a person who is still going to sit using an old school model, trying to actually compete. You can already see.
And the keyword is compete.
For you to compete, technology is an enabler to compete. And that's what's important. It is an enabler. And a lot of times people think technology is just the answer. It enables, it enhances. So you already have to have the mindset, you already have to have the tools in place, but then you add on. And it's like having a turbo in your car. It adds that power. It gives you that additional power. So important to have, the tools that we currently using, because they actually enhance the business. And it gives you information that's also quite reliable because you're getting it straight from the source, which is the bank statements, as opposed to actually, and a lot of times we've seen this with entrepreneurs, as you rightly said earlier on, they run the business out of the bank, which is their personal one, and then they run the business. And then they hear about a funding opportunity and they come to us with bank statements from 3 years, no management accounts. Versus a guy who from day one set up his or her Xero account, interlinks every transaction that comes from the business account is there. All the receipts are actually uploaded onto the portal. They sit there. Guess who is going to be ahead? If that opportunity opens today and closes in 2 weeks' time, most likely you will still be scurrying looking for those invoices when that person presses submit.
I like that. So technology, you said something, I'm going to highlight it or reiterate it. It's not just the answer, but it's an enabler. And that's powerful. You've done incredibly well in the time that you've spent not only in corporate, but also building your businesses in your own capacity.
Yeah.
What have been some of the hardest challenges that you've had to overcome, but most importantly, the lessons that you've learned from that journey?
When you don't have a sale, when it's quiet, and you ask yourself, is it really worth it? Am I actually crazy for starting something like this? Does it actually make sense? Because a lot of the times we will post the lovely stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, we're making money, the business
Yeah.
is growing.
Yeah.
But we'll never post when you're sitting and saying, was this worth it? When you're
Yeah.
sitting alone in your thoughts and saying, am I crazy? Because you go through those periods where you think,
Sure.
maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this is not possible.
Mm.
And to overcome that, your vision must be clear as daylight. Because when there's no sales coming in and there's no proof of payments being sent, your vision must be, that is where I'm going. I'm going there, whether it's raining or it's sunlight. Because entrepreneurship is not about when it's just daylight and it's sunlight and it's shiny and rainbows. It's also when the chips are down.
Yeah.
So in those periods, it's also just being steadfast on your crazy dream. And a lot of the times we don't even hear about the businesses that went bust. The businesses that actually didn't make it.
Do we ever? It's a stat. We just know that 70% don't.
So it's a stat, but how real was it? What was that one thing? Or what was that golden moment that maybe they missed? What was that golden moment that they didn't get? What was that golden moment that never came?
Sure.
So those things do happen. So you are crazy because it might or might not happen. It's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship success is not guaranteed. You could have the best business, you could have the best ideas, but if the environment is not right and if the economy is not right, unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people will say, just start. Yes, start.
Yeah.
But start knowing that it might fail and it's okay to fail. I think it's very important for people to realize that it is okay to fail. Failure is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
We've made it so bad, but it also speaks to how we grow up. You grow up in a household where you get 80%, and the question's, oh, why didn't you get 85? You get 85, why didn't you get 90? We don't grow up in societies that say, well done, you got 80. We know that you're not mathematically inclined, but well done. You've actually done well. Oh, you got 45%, you failed because you didn't understand the fundamentals. How do we help you? How do we assist you?
Yeah.
And that's important because failure does not necessarily mean you don't know what you're doing. It just means there's fundamentals that you need to correct.
Yeah. I like that so much because we literally had on a different podcast conversation. And the guest said something and it links so lovely with what you just said now. He said, in South Africa, a lot of people just don't have room to fail. And I love then now bringing in what you've just said. Failing is okay.
It's okay.
Right? Now, we do want to get to a place where more people have room to fail in this country.
Unfortunately, though, unfortunately, if my entire family is relying on me not to fail because their next meal comes from me, then guess what? All the pressure's on me. I have to be successful. I don't have an option because it's not for me. It's not about the next Lamborghini. Yeah. It's about food on the table.
It's about day to
so
day.
That's where it gets. Then you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
You know, and that is insane in itself because in survival mode, it is actually difficult because your shoulders are heavy.
Yeah. You're not thinking creatively.
Correct.
You're not thinking about, no. This is about, it's a day-to-day game.
100%.
Check-to-check game.
100%.
What advice would you give? In fact, I think before I ask that last question, you've spoken from your journey from an entrepreneurial perspective, but you've also done incredibly well in the corporate space. Two things there. One lesson that you'd highlight in your corporate journey. By the way, congratulations are in order and due. The good sir has just become a partner at one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. So congratulations on that. What would be one lesson that you would highlight along that journey and the trajectory to get there? But then also, what advice would you give to you're a CA?
Yeah.
Which we know is, for starters, a tough profession to get into. And then it's a tough space in terms of industry.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a young person who finds themselves either struggling just to get that CASA? And I know many of them who that's their goal, their dream, and it's a tough thing to get. And then I know many who have gotten it and are in this space and are now, flustered by the plethora of issues in corporate. And I know I've packed a lot in here, but speak to.
It's a brilliant analysis, and you just actually summarized it quite well and packaged it into a question. A lot of the times people see equity partner at the end, young partner at 28, I was already a director. They see that.
Sure.
But you go back a few years, just a few years. When I was doing my first year of articles, I was actually still doing my CTA.
Sure.
And what that meant is that I was actually doing articles and actually studying at the same time. So if you ask anyone that's on the CA path to do CTA part-time, you're a bit ridiculous, you're a bit crazy.
Sure.
You don't do that. And because of that, I then developed a different mindset. I started asking why quite a lot. Why am I doing certain things? Why am I debiting? Why am I crediting? Why is there a deferred tax here? A lot of the times as students, what we tend to do is we tend to just jam it in, have the information just to be an outlay. And when you're actually on the CA journey, especially when you get to CTA, third year CTA, you need to know why you're doing certain things. You need to actually understand the fundamentals of what you are actually doing. I'll give you an example. When we were actually, when I was still at WITS,
Sure.
they gave us the analysis of equity. And usually, typically, an analysis of equity is what you as a student would produce.
Okay.
The question paper gave us that.
Yeah. Oh, now you
Here you go.
Yeah.
And it was correct. There was nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. And now you're like, okay.
So what is expected of me?
What's happening now?
This is the answer. What is the trick? And that question was on a different level because then you knew how to
get
put it
to
together.
The answer.
But why is it this way? How do you interpret it? How do you actually, and that's important.
Sure.
Everyone that's on the journey to becoming a chartered accountant, why are you doing certain things? Yes, you've got the standards, you've got the books, they're right in front of you. But what are we trying to mitigate or what are we trying to achieve? If you know the end goal, you'll know how to get there. Now, a lot of the times we think we know how to get there, but we don't know what the end goal of it is. Why did SARS put that provision in? What were they trying to mitigate? What was the issue around it? So it's very important that when you're studying, don't study for the sake of, I've got the knowledge, I'm going to write this. A lot of people have the knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what people don't actually know is that I actually failed. I actually failed my third year. I got 49%.
Sure.
And WITS then you had to repeat all 4 subjects. So I'd passed the 3, failed 1, had to repeat
all 4.
All 4, which I was like, but why? Because I've passed. And why don't you just give me 1% so that I can move on?
Sure.
A lot of people say, why don't you just? But that was when my character was being built. In that failure, character was being built.
Come on, sir.
So very important to learn that your character gets built in your darkest times. Not when you're on top. Character's built when you are at the bottom. So what then happens is that I go on to repeat the one course, which is FINAC.
Sure.
And what I do is very interesting. I start working for what is called PMI, Philip Morris International, and we launched Blue Feel, the cigarette with a switch.
Oh, yeah.
And I was the best salesman within that space. So we were selling cigarettes on weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, at different interventions, at different places.
So you weren't even working in your profession?
I was a student, I was in sales, but I was actually repeating my course that I was busy with.
At the time.
And what I then did was very different.
Yeah.
I started going to class to understand my gaps. Where do I have gaps now? So I didn't go to class anymore for, let me go learn what IS 16 is or what IFRS 16 is. I was going there to see, I know IS 16, what am I missing? So as you study, don't focus on what you know. Focus on what you don't know. And that's how you actually go through this journey. What don't I know? And why do I not know it? Why am I getting this wrong? So I also started having a book of mistakes. So every time I do a question and I get something wrong, I'd go have a page that says deferred tax. When there's deferred tax and there's investment property, I get it wrong. Why am I getting it wrong? So I do that. And the day before exams, I just go and read my book of mistakes because that's where I know there's my weaknesses. So work on your weaknesses, not your strengths. Because as you go along, your weaknesses, and a lot of students do this, like say, I'm not strong at this topic. I hope they don't give me a cash flow. I hope, and guess what? You're going to get that
You're
cash
going to
flow.
get the guy. Oh,
So don't shy away from it.
you're going to get that cash
I'd
flow.
rather be punished in training and be punished on the field on match day. Get it wrong while you're training. It's okay. So that when you get in the ring for the actual thing, you're ready. So that's just on the studying side of things. When it comes to corporate, I'd say you have to be a sponge. Be willing to learn. So you walk in typically, everyone is now qualified or on their route to being qualified. You start articles and you go into a firm. How many other CAs are in there?
Yes.
How many other CAs are you competing with?
Yeah.
Yes, you're all friends, but you're actually competing for the same jobs once you are done.
Yep.
Now, coming in on the back foot, having failed, I'm repeating the guys already done. So at night, they go home. I stood with my books.
Sure.
But what I then did, and it's very important to also spend time learning. I remember my first audit engagement.
Yeah.
And the manager was Claudia. I mean, what a gent. Claudia gave me, I think the file in its entirety had 38 queries. I had 32 of the 38. I'm like, why am I being punished? He says, I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching you so that when you go to your next audit, you don't repeat the same mistakes. So the trend was happening here. I was learning from my mistakes at every go, at every corner.
Yeah.
And by the end of my third year, I was probably one of the best trainees. I was actually on a fast track to becoming a partner because I just didn't like audit. That's the only thing. But because I actually understood what are the fundamentals, what do I need to do right, what do I need to do here, and it's very important. So in corporate, you need to be a sponge. Have the willingness to learn. A lot of people get into corporate and say, oh, I've got a degree, I've got an MBA, I've got this. Yes, you do. Granted, well done. But can you then maneuver in this jungle? Because it's a jungle.
It definitely is
It's a jungle.
It definitely is a jungle. But final question. You've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs in the work that you do. You've had your own journey. Whether it is to an entrepreneur who finds themselves building a business, thinking about starting a business, or even to someone in a corporate context. Final words. What would you say?
It's a journey, and your journey is your journey. That's simple. It's a journey. Your journey is your journey, no one else's journey. So run your own race. You came on earth alone, you will leave on earth alone. Embrace your journey.
Mr. Pat, good sir. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for the insights and the great conversation. Take care.
Thank you very much.